Today on the Playbook Podcast, it is 8 days to go now until Election Day. We will get into all of that this morning. Plus, Donald Trump continues his tour of Asia. He's landing in Japan in the last couple of hours. And it's day 27 of the government shutdown. Has anything changed? Not really. Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Monday, October 27th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Megan, thanks so much for joining us. Did you have a lovely weekend?
Oh, I did. I had a beautiful fall weekend. Went on a hike in Rock Creek Park. This is an amazing time of year.
Well, this time of year also means voting time of year, of course, in America. And suddenly, after all the waiting, they are upon us. There are 8 days to go, as I say, until this year's elections on November the 4th. It's an off year, but there's some pretty interesting races. And I thought this would be a good day just to run through some of the implications of a couple of the big ones, Megan. There's obviously two big governors' races happening in Virginia and in New Jersey. I think people are hoping they're going to give us a bit of a clue about how the two parties are faring. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of hopes being pinned on these races as far as being hugely revelatory and for Democrats, for instance, charting some sort of path forward for how they ought to approach the midterm elections. But it just doesn't seem like we're going to get sort of that satisfying conclusion that Democrats would like out of either of these two governors' races. We've seen some really interesting polling on the economy and prices and, the role that's playing in voters' decision-making in these two races. And I think that really foreshadows, what we're going to see in the midterm elections, right, where we're expecting prices and the economy to remain central issues. So not hugely revelatory, but at least tells us sort of where voters' heads might be at a little bit.
Yeah, most people are expecting the Dems to win in Virginia and probably in New Jersey, although it seems to be tightening there. Although you can see them desperately trying to manage expectations on that now. But I think they really have to win both of those two if they're going to feel like they're on course to at least taking back the House next year. However, the race that's really hogging all the attention is not the big governorship races, but it's the mayoral election in New York. And last night, Megan, we saw this extraordinary rally in the 13,000 capacity Forest Hill Stadium in New York, where Zoran Mamdani was joined by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You don't see rallies like that very often in mayoral contests, I would say. It was a pretty big deal, or at least it felt like it.
Yeah, I was looking at the videos from that rally, and it was massive. I think it just sort of shows, sort of the pent up energy within the Democratic Party. And of course, New York City is not necessarily a microcosm of the country, but I do think it sort of speaks to just the angst and frustration and desire for a place to channel that. I think that's sort of what we saw at that rally. And there is just a lot of energy on the left and this progressive side of the left that is trying to have an answer to this question of what is our answer to Trump and what is the Democratic Party in the year 2025 and beyond.
Every so often you get a politician who has a breakthrough like this and just suddenly captures some sort of energy, as you rightly say, definitely not from the entire country or anything like it. But still, there is a thing happening with Mamdani mania in New York City, at least, and on the left generally, I think. What do you think, Megan? What is it about him that's captured this moment? Is it the videos and the sort of smooth talking, or is it something more deeper than that?
I mean, I think it's the videos to a certain extent, but I think there's a certain rawness and honesty, right? People just want to hear their politicians talk to them like they're real people and in relatable ways, and not in I'm a politician pretending to be a relatable human, but as in this is actually me and myself, sort of in an authentic format. And I think that's what's so appealing on the right about Trump is he says what he thinks and he is who he is, again, for better or for worse. And I think we're seeing that real desire for authenticity on the left. And I think Mamdani brings that to bear. And I think also, again, just sort of he's someone to rally around. He's, a new face and new ideas, again, ones that not every Democrat even will agree with, but someone who has said, I have a answer to the moment we're in, and one that doesn't feel like it's been sort of run through the meat grinder of Democratic policy prescriptions and how one is supposed to talk about this kind of stuff.
It's definitely not the same stuff we've heard before. And to your point before, he talks about prices incessantly, and that's the thing that actually people care about the most. The thing I'm most interested in about Zoran Mamdani, speaking as someone who's very focused on the White House and on the national picture and looking forward, and I know you are, of course, as well in your job, is what happens after he wins, assuming that he does win. Not really through the prism of what it means for New York, although people on the left will tell you it's going to be a revolution and amazing. People on the right will tell you it's the biggest disaster that's ever coming for that city. But from my point of view, the politics of it is fascinating because Republicans at the moment, absolutely condemning Mamdani, saying he's going to be a disaster, saying, we heard Donald Trump calling him a quote communist lunatic not so long ago. Obviously something that Mamdani would reject, both of those characterizations. But I actually think Donald Trump's kind of going soft on him at the moment. I don't think he's going really that hard after the guy at the moment, because you speak to Republicans in private, and much as they sort of don't want him to win, of course, part of them sort of does want him to win because they see an opportunity here, right? They see a huge political opportunity. They think this is a guy they wouldn't use this word, but I will demonize and paint as the sort of terrifying future face of the left that's lost its mind. And this is what happens when you vote Democrat, party's out of control, and just you wait for 2026. And I think, assuming he does win next week, the story about the Republicans and Mamdani, and particularly Trump, particularly focusing on him, I think is going to go into overdrive after that moment.
I think you're totally right there, Jack. I mean, I think they absolutely will use him as sort of this Democratic boogeyman. We always need one of those in the election, and I think Republicans have been sort of missing that void. Obviously, they have Chuck Schumer, but there's only so often you can talk about the Schumer shutdown before the public starts to roll his eyes. Mamdani is a new face, a new presence. Someone to sort of rile up the MAGA base around, certainly. But I think it'll be interesting to see if the president does, step up his rhetoric here. I think we've already seen him increase his rhetoric a little bit, but whether that continues post-election.
And we've obviously seen him clashing with J.B. Pritzker in Illinois and Gavin Newsom in California, and, the sending in the troops there. There's been no conversation about New York City, but once Mamdani's there, I don't know. I'll be very interested to see how the clash between those personalities plays out next year. Assuming that he wins, of course, the race is still 8 days away, and he might not. Speaking of California, the other big election, of course, happening next week is the proposition on what I'm going to call gerrymandering. It's certainly supposed to be called redistricting in California. That's a very big moment for the midterms, given what we've already seen happen in Texas. And it feels like Gavin Newsom's going to win that. That the polls look pretty good for him as far as we can see that he's going to get this done, Megan.
Yeah. And this really has been, Democrats' answer to this, a big push we've seen from Donald Trump and the right, really just trying to redo the electoral map. And this is Gavin Newsom and California Democrats trying to fight fire with fire. Of course, they had to go through these extra hurdles that Republican state legislatures who could just redraw these maps on their own did not have to go through, right? They had to actually take this to a vote of the people to say, hey, California voters, are you okay with us doing that? And so I think this is really sort of a tremendous moment. It was obviously a political test for, Governor Newsom if he could get this through. And we'll see ultimately what the voters decide. But as you mentioned, he seems to be doing fairly well here.
There's actually a special session happening down the road from here today in Virginia where Democrats are exploring whether they can redistrict the map there to try and bag themselves a couple of other seats. And of course, there are other Republican efforts happening all around the country wherever they can see an opportunity. Remember the 1986 men's Olympic 100-meter final, but pretty much everyone was on drugs, not literally. And it's gone down. They now call it the dirtiest race in history. I kind of feel like the 2026 midterms are shaping up to be something like this, like with both sides just frantically redrawing maps wherever they can to try and get an edge. It's not a very becoming sight for democracy, is it?
I mean, it just shows you how close and competitive these, battles for control of the House have been. And when every seat counts, you got to try to change the rules of the game to make it in your favor. And Donald Trump started it, and Democrats are
doing it. Of course, there's a fear among Democrats that it's going to get worse than this. And if you looked at the reaction to a Truth Social post the president put out yesterday, where he started talking about, once again, the 2020 election being rigged and stolen and scandal, but then he started throwing his vision forward towards the midterms, talking about banning mail-in and early voting and needing voter ID, trying to say the California prop vote is going to be dishonest, telling Republicans need to get smart, telling the DOJ to get involved.
Yeah.
That sort of talk from the president Democrats find incredibly unnerving. There is a genuine concern amongst large parts of the Democrat Party, that Trump is going to try and do something more than just redistricting this year, that's going to somehow undermine this enormously important election, in their eyes at least.
Right. And this is sort of a prelude to that. I mean, the argument you hear from Democrats is just the more restrictions you put in place, like voter ID or, sending monitors in, that could have a chilling effect. These are the arguments Democrats use to push back on some of these things. From a Republican standpoint, they're saying this is about ensuring the integrity of elections and that folks are who they say they are when they're showing up to the poll. But there are real world implications of these kinds of policies on the votes. And like what we were just talking about, in so many of these races, I mean, they can come down to, in federal races, sometimes even thousands of votes, which is a very slim margin in a Senate race or a House race. But you get into the hundreds. And in some of these local races, it comes down to the dozens. And so these policies are extremely meaningful. And if you even dissuade, 50, 100, 200 voters, that could have a very meaningful difference in some of these elections.
Right. And every seat counts in such a knife edge as election as we're expecting the one for the House to be next year. Just rather depressingly, I got sight of something compiled every year by a group called the World Justice Project, Megan, which is like a big bunch of lawyers who they put together a league table every year of the rule of law and which countries are most adhering to it in their eyes. And America has rather plummeted down the table over the last 12 months. It's one of the 10 nations where it's got worst, fastest, alongside countries like Togo and Mozambique and Sudan. In their judgment, I'm sure the White House will completely reject this, but it's another sort of, but it's kind of like a red light on the dashboard when you look at the report amongst all the other noise about American democracy at the moment. I certainly think it's a storyline that's going to develop a lot over the next 12 months and maybe starting next week.
It really will. And I think it just, it underscores all of these changes, right, that are being made to American democracy that Democrats would decry and Republicans would say is making things better. I think you see all of that summarized there exactly. I mean, the country has changed so much in the last 10 months.
Let's talk about the president himself, who, of course, is in Asia and has been over the weekend, is in Malaysia. He should have landed in Japan by the time this podcast actually gets published. He's currently in the air while we're speaking, and he's due to meet the Emperor of Japan this morning and then the new Prime Minister of Japan tonight, Japan's first female Prime Minister, Prime Minister Takachi, who's an old friend or an old ally of the late Shinzo Abe, who, of course, is a very good friend or was a very good friend of Donald Trump. Sort of feel like they're going to have a good rapport straight away. And I think she's quite a hardline conservative figure in Japan as well. So feels like Trump's going to get on with this leader almost without trying, I reckon.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of natural affinity there just because of the Abe relationship. I mean, the president, spoke with Prime Minister Takaichi on the flight over, the very, very long flight over to Kuala Lumpur over the weekend. And he spoke very warmly about her. I mean, it seems like this is a relationship that's predisposed to go well, which is really fascinating when you think about it in the broader context of the president's relationships with other world leaders. Sometimes he gets along with folks, but they go back and forth and they have their tiffs. The president really had a lot of respect for the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and it seems like he is transferring a lot of that onto the new Prime Minister. Of course, they will develop their own relationship, and there's a lot of very significant tension points the two of them are going to have to talk about. The two countries, reach this initial trade agreement and investments, but there's a lot of things President Trump is going to be pushing for when it comes to commitments on defense spending. So seems like the relationship is inclined to go in a positive direction, but a lot of tough things that they're going to have to talk about.
And he's already spent lots of time talking about trade this weekend. He was in Malaysia and finalized trade deals with two nations there, Cambodia and Malaysia. But of course, all of this, Megan, is a precursor to the really big trade talks he's got coming on Thursday. His first face-to-face meeting with President Xi Jinping of China since 2019, and coming at a moment when obviously trade tensions between the two countries have been rocketing up and down all year, mainly led by Donald Trump's aggression and then China pushing back harder than maybe expected and blah, blah, blah. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, was on all over our TV screens yesterday, making a pretty strong case that don't worry, it's going to be fine. We've basically got it sorted. Xi and Trump are going to figure all this out on Thursday. What did you make of what he said, and where do you think we're at right now?
The biggest thing that jumped out to me, and I've been sort of trying to read between the lines and see, okay, what kind of deal can we expect out of this meeting, right? The president keeps talking about there's going to be, some sort of great deal or compromise or what have you coming out of this meeting with President Xi. But what I've been talking to folks about over the last week and my sources is, okay, how substantial is the progress that is actually made with China if there is some sort of agreement announced? And so what we heard from Secretary Bessent when he made his rounds on Sunday was he said that he expects China not to immediately impose these, sweeping export controls on rare earths that we've been talking about. He also said that the U.S. wouldn't go forward with 100% tariffs on China, which, we kind of expected that was a bargaining chip. He talked about that, they've agreed on substantial agriculture purchases for U.S. farmers. So all these things seem like positive movements. When you think about it, it's really just unwinding the escalation between the two countries that we've seen in recent weeks, right? It doesn't really make a ton of substantial progress on some of these, underlying issues between the two countries. The one of them that I will say that Secretary Bessent mentioned is he did say that the Chinese would begin to help with the precursor chemicals for fentanyl, which of course was the grounds on which the U.S. imposed its first round of tariffs on China earlier this year. So that could be movement sort of beyond de-escalation. But I think the big thing that I'm going to be watching for in the coming days, and I know a lot of, China observers in the U.S. are going to be watching for is, are the two countries really making meaningful progress toward a trade deal? Or is this just sort of unwinding things and going back to where we were earlier this year when, Secretary Bessent was meeting with his Chinese counterparts in Geneva and just sort of getting us back out of the immediate dire trade war situation?
Just giving us lots of stuff to write about in the meantime that never ended up happening. Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay. Before we go, this is great. The other big thing happening this week, of course, here in America is Halloween on Friday, which I have discovered, judging by walking around my housing estate, is a pretty big deal.
It's a big deal, Jack.
Oh, my goodness. So everyone out there who hasn't bought a costume yet, Megan, you found the perfect costume. Tell us what you found.
I did. And it's so appropriate for me, given how much I have covered trade over the last 10 months of my life. Spirit Halloween is selling a reciprocal tariff costume. So if you remember the Liberation Day announcement and the giant posters that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick brought out and President Trump held up proudly. You too can be that reciprocal tariff chart. It has some fun little additions, tariffs on the Tooth Fairy, the sun, Santa Claus. So, a little bit of humor thrown in there as well. But for the political junkie out there and the trade lawyer expert, I know there's a lot of you out there. This could be the costume for you.
Megan has sent me the link and I'm looking at it right now. An adult reciprocal tariffs parody costume. Not serious. I love it.
Just in case you weren't sure.
I might get my kids dressed up in that on Friday.
The sad part is it's sold out. So at this point, you're going to have to create your own. You're going to have to go get the poster board out and DIY it.
What does this tell us about America that they've already sold out of reciprocal tariff costume?
Apparently, America was way more into the Liberation Day tariff announcement than I expected.
There you go. Megan, thanks so much for that. Thank you for joining us as always. That's all we got time for this morning. We've got loads more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we will be back tomorrow. Have a lovely day.